viewers, episode 2. The logistical backbone of Australia, the transport system, relies on fossil fuel, refined fuel. There's no getting away from that. Like it or lump it, that's the way it is at the moment. And what I mean by transport is that heavy transport, right across all facets of life here in Australia, heavy transport is needed. They're running 24/7. Semi-trailers, that sort of thing, some rail, to deliver products either for processing or processed products to the supermarket, retailers and so on. Emergency services also require fuel. What does that mean in terms of Australia's reliance on fossil fuels, refined fuel? Okay, I'll put some links in down the bottom. The latest information I've found as of last year on the internet. Yes, you can't trust the internet, I know that. You've got to weed through several websites and so forth, but the figures I'm quoting are roughly consistent across all the websites, and some of them are government websites. Okay, Australia's fuel requirements, transport requirements, consumes 98% reliant on fuel, either in the form of crude oil products or refined fuels being imported into this country. The other 2%, we do have some electrified rail, that sort of thing, but most of our heavy rail runs by diesel. Our heavy trucks and light and medium transport requirements on the roads in this country rely on diesel. Some of them on petrol or gasoline, particularly with distributions in the cities, supermarkets, wherever, even down to your coffee latte you pick up in the morning before you're on your way to work or whatever. So you can see that, this country relies a lot on transport systems to keep the logistic backbone of this country running. That includes government agencies, our health system, our military, certainly commercial air flights, military air flights, government air flights. They all use some sort of refined fuel. In this country, a lot of oil refineries have been closed down. The information I've been able to find is that we still have oil refineries in Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne and Brisbane. A lot of the old oil refineries were closed down. One, because they were inefficient, it was old technology, and two, because of money. It was much cheaper to refine crude oil overseas and import it into this country as refined fuels, offloading at shipping ports around the country. It still requires fuel to take those imported refined fuels and distribute it around the country, in the cities, remote areas, country areas, that sort of thing. So how much does Australia import? The latest figure I found was about 80% of our fuel requirements are imported. 80%. A lot of the refineries were closed down because as Asia became more industrialised, mega refineries, that sort of thing, it was far cheaper for them to refine our crude oil, whether it's crude oil we've bought from overseas or excess crude oil produced by this country that our refineries can no longer handle. It's actually exported back. One instance I saw Singapore, where it's refined and shipped back to us as refined fuel. That brings into question, how much oil does Australia have in the ground as known crude oil reserves? Well, not a lot. We have Bass Strait, we have the Northwest Shelf, Western Australia, some on the mainland continent, some in territorial waters. We have oil rigs in the Timor Sea, Mooney oil fields, and that's just crude oil supplies. Okay, that includes liquid natural gas, which is also used to fuel some vehicles. Not as popular now as it used to be. It's mainly used for industrial heating and industry and home heating and that sort of thing, cooking, whatever. So that's 80%. They estimate by 2030 Australia will be 100% reliant on fuel imports, refined fuel imports, because they're still looking at closing down the remaining refineries here in Australia. It's much cheaper when you factor in profit margins, as all companies do. They're a law unto their own, like the bloody banks, and it's more cost effective for the oil companies to refine the oil overseas and import it in this country as refined petroleum products. And let's not forget that refined petroleum products is not only just fuel, it's lubricants, everything we need to keep the lifestyle industry, modern day mechanisation greased. That's just putting it literally. It also includes aviation fuel. So raises the question, how vulnerable are our oil supplies or refined fuel supplies from overseas sources? In Australia, we're not self-sufficient in crude oil in the ground. There's a lot of exploration that needs to be done. There hasn't been a lot of exploration done in recent times. Australia has vast reserves of shale oil, and back in the late 1800s up until roughly the early 1900s, yes, we were mining this and refining it to some extent, mostly for kerosene. It stopped in the early 1900s because then we were importing cheaper kerosene from the United States, if my memory serves me. So economically it wasn't viable. To mine this stuff, yeah, it's damn expensive, and there's very good quality oil shale or shale oil in this country. It takes something like about a ton or a tonne, which you may want to go. I know there's differences, but to produce about 200 litres of oil, which then has to be processed into refined fuels. We do not have the infrastructure or the industry to refine shale oil. We just don't have it. We have vast coal reserves. Yes, you can make a fuel through industrial process out of coal. We do not have that in this country either. We export it, most of it overseas. So just how vulnerable is Australia to an oil shock? And by what I mean by an oil shock is okay, someone has a dummy spit in the Middle East, again, the never-ending story. Prices of oil go up, oil supply becomes shorter, less. There are oil fields in Asia, around Borneo, those places. There are known oil reserves in the South China Sea, and I'll cover that later. There are known oil reserves in Papua New Guinea. Still in the very early stages of it, including natural gas. The next video I'll make is, we'll go back a little bit in history, what they call ticketed oil. I'll cover that in the next video. Okay, and Warburg's on a lot. Thanks very much. The more I dig into this, yeah, you've hit it right on the button. I don't think Australian people really understand just how vulnerable our fuel supplies are. We're skating pretty thin ice as far as oil reserves and refined fuel reserves in this country, but I'll cover that in another video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next episode.